The story of astronomy is the story of mankind. It's our origins. It's how we came to be, how planet Earth came to be. And that's an important story. I think it's important for us to understand where we came from and where we're going.
But I was able to stand and stare in a kind of magnificent awe at being able to read from this scroll, which looks on the outside like it's just absolutely nothing and completely wrecked.
This is the Discovery Files podcast from the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm Nate Podker. Along the west coast of Italy, in the region Campania, lies Mount Vesuvius. The infamous volcanic eruption of 79 AD devastated the region and destroyed cities including Pompeii and its neighbor, Herculaneum. But the ash and pumice that buried Herculaneum also carbonized and preserved many objects, such as wooden roofs, beds, and doors, as well as organic objects such as food and papyrus scrolls. 2,000 years later, a team of researchers at the NSF-supported EduceLab are working to revolutionize digital restoration and unwrap these most fragile of written records. Our guest today is Brent Seales, a computer science professor at the University of Kentucky and principal investigator at EduceLab. Professor Seales, thank you for joining us today.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So I want to first kind of set up the background a little bit and have you tell us, what is heritage science for people that don't know?
Heritage science is the application of scientific techniques to objects that are of cultural significance. And the application of those techniques runs the gamut of what we know about science. We do material composition, we do digitization, an entire set of things that we can apply to heritage objects.
So what and where is EduceLab?
EduceLab is a laboratory that's being funded by the National Science Foundation, being commissioned at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, Kentucky.
So what will the goals of the lab be? What are you then going to be working on there?
Our goal with the funding we're getting from the National Science Foundation is to build a heritage science lab that has a set of equipment that is organized into operational clusters that allows us to address objects across the gamut that are of cultural significance. So we have an operational cluster that represents bench analysis machines, so scanning electron microscopes, for example. We also have a cluster that lets us do mobile work in the field, so we can field deploy objects to places that can't be moved to the lab, like an archaeological site or a cemetery. And then we also have a flexible environment where we can innovate different kinds of equipment that would be applicable for objects that we can't anticipate. And being able to do that in a lab, to be able to address the variation of cultural objects is really important.
Absolutely. Moving into the Herculaneum Scrolls, how did you first get interested in them? How did they come to your attention?
The Herculaneum Scrolls are iconic, and a computer scientist like myself was not aware of those scrolls through the educational training that I had, which focused more on evolving hardware and computational techniques, not on the classics. But I became aware through my interdisciplinary work of how important the Herculaneum Scrolls were in the mid-aughts, about 2004, 2005, when I came into contact with a professor by the name of Richard Janko, who explained to me how important these scrolls were and how they represented still unknown works from the ancient world, likely because they were still rolled up. And in many cases, those rolled up scrolls were unknown in terms of what the works would be inside them.
Right. There's not really any way to have any idea what could be there even, right?
Some of the scrolls have been opened in a partial or fragmentary state. And so they give us hints of the glory of those works. We have partial philosophical and literary works that allow us to sort of place, from the fragmentary witness, what the work probably was. And those titles run the gamut from on rhetoric, on love, on music, on poems. And so it's tantalizing to know that that literary work is in fact there from the open scrolls that we have. But there are 300 or 400 scrolls that are intact. They haven't been opened at all. Imagine the glory of being able to read those.
We might not have to imagine it just if you keep going the way you're going here. So thinking about working with them, like who owns the scrolls? Is it difficult to get access to them?
The access to the Herculaneum Scrolls is really tricky, and it's taken me much of the time in doing this work to figure out how to have sustained and regular access to the material. Most of the material from Herculaneum is in Naples, Italy, either in the library in Naples or in the Archaeological Museum of Naples. And those artifacts are kept and conserved there. And there are other institutions that have material. Some scrolls were given to Napoleon, for example, and ended up in the Institut de France in Paris. And also some scrolls were given to King George IV when Ferdinand II in Italy was making the rounds and delivering some of this material as gifts. And so those ended up in the Bodleian Library and in the library, the British Library in London.
So what was the process scanning the scrolls like?
You just feel like you're in the presence of this engineering marvel. The scale of that telescope, in a very real way, the GBT allows us to see the unseen.
The kind of digitization that we decided we wanted to do was volumetric. So we needed a picture of everything inside, and not just one picture, but a complete volume. So it had to be three-dimensional. So we chose tomography, computed tomography, because that gave us the structure of the interior in a complete volumetric way. Being able to image the scrolls using tomography, it turned out to be really tricky because they're fragile. And the way tomography works is that you have to have this 360-degree look. And so the material actually has to stand up on its end and do a kind of pirouette. So we spent a fair amount of time figuring out how to fixture the scrolls, which means building cases and ways to support them so that that kind of turning and pirouetting could be done safely.
Right. Like I think it's in kind of a case situation. Like what is holding it up, I guess?
Well, what we settled on was to find a way to create a case that's form-fitting. And we do that by reconstructing the exterior shape of the scroll, which in most cases is very strange because they've been compressed and pushed and pulled and flattened. And that form-fitting case is what actually holds it up. So there is no one contact point, but instead the scroll is kind of being held by a form-fitted cocoon that we've 3D printed, and it's bespoke. There's one that's unique for each one of the scrolls.
Very cool. How many have you scanned?
To date, we've been able to collect data on 6 Herculaneum scrolls, and we're in the process of reading one of them now, and we believe we will be able to read all 6 of those, and hopefully that will open the door to the 600, right? So that represents really 1 or 2% of everything that's available.
Is it, I guess, in the scanning process, is it complicated to put them together? Like, I'm not an expert enough to know what you're meaning. Like, is it thousands of little slices? Like, what's the best way to kind of conceptualize what it is if you aren't familiar?
The tomography that we do could actually collect in one rotation the entire scroll, but it would be at a very low resolution. It's a little bit like you can take a picture of a document and you move the camera out to see the whole document, but you might not be close enough to read every word because you might not have the resolution in your camera. And it's the same with doing tomography. So what we actually have to do is get the scroll very close to the X-ray and do the scanning in little sections. And sometimes we can end up having to do 40 or 80 of those little sections and then put them all back together. So yeah, it's very much a fragmentary kind of collection that we then have to reassemble.
So thinking about moving into the Vesuvius Challenge, can you kind of set up what that is and how this is going out into the academic world?
We spent a lot of time getting to the point where we could even think about a competition. We did all of the science, much of it funded by the National Science Foundation, to get to the point where we knew that we had a technique that would solve every one of the problems that is in the way of actually being able to read this material. And when we knew we were at that point, we had done initial AI experiments, we had done virtual unwrapping, we had tools for everything. We were able to team up and partner with Silicon Valley investors, more than that, really innovators and entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, represented by Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross. And when they suggested to me the idea of teaming up, I knew the time was right because we had done all of this prior science. So the entry for the contestants would be very low. They could immediately start using our open source software, using all the data we had collected, and they could immediately be productive as contestants.
So thinking about that lead in, I guess, a little bit, were you able to read things like characters, or like was there any bit of it that was kind of recognizable up until that point?
The place we had gotten to when the competition began was that we had used open fragments as control experiments to be able to prove that the AI would work. Those open fragments gave us two things. They gave us a visible control where we could see the ink answer that we should have because we have a visible layer of visible writing. And then they gave us the chance to see some of the hidden layers that were easy to segment because the fragments were sort of linear. They're like pages of a book. They're flat. They're not wrapped up because they're pieces of a scroll, not a whole scroll. So we did that work, and we were able to show that the machine learning could work on the visible text, and we could confirm it was working. And then we also showed that there was going to be evidence of the ink showing up on the hidden layers. And it was at that point that we threw it to the contest and said, okay, now here's an internal scroll with 100 wraps. Let's go see who can be the first to pull the ink out of that.
I think you just had some exciting results recently. Can you tell us a little bit about where this has gone so far?
Well, I have to say that Nat Friedman has been masterful in the way that he's run the competition. And I expect that he will be getting a lot of interest in other kinds of competitions that might pull people along when they get to the right place in their scientific exploration. But we were just able to award a first letters prize, and it's an intermediate prize on the way to the grand prize. But the first letters prize is an award that says we have to have 10 letter forms from the interior of the scroll that are readable by the papyrologists in a certain area, in a certain region. And so it's more than it being language-based, right, or the identification of the work, the first letters prize was really a technical challenge in proving that the techniques would work to be able to reveal the ink to the degree that you could actually read letters.
Could you tell us what that word was?
The first word that the competitor, whose name is Luke Ferrator, was able to reveal was the word purphuras in Greek, which means purple.
Was it exciting to see these results coming back, like seeing that the proof of concept is working?
No. Exciting is much too small a word for what I felt after all this time and after all the effort and after the belief that for me has never waned or completely extinguished. But let's say that it has varied over the years. But it's hard to put into words the way I have felt in the last 2 weeks in seeing all of this work come to fruition. So yeah, I wasn't really able to say much when I first saw that word, but I was able to stand and stare in a kind of magnificent awe at being able to read from this scroll, which looks on the outside like it's just absolutely nothing and completely wrecked. And it's actually a very important lesson for all of us. We've heard the old adage that you cannot judge a book by its cover, but when you put on the lens, right, of what's possible, and you take a look at this material and you realize there's actually ancient writing in here, and then when that actually happens and it's true, it's an incredible feeling.
It was pretty shocking to me that you can make that work. Like looking at like the pictures you guys have of it, it looks like it's charcoal out of the fire. Like it doesn't look like it's something that could be holding on this kind of information, and that it's still intact and technology has got to where you can unwrap it 2,000 years later is really crazy.
I know. It's that writer, the science fiction writer, and I forget his name just now, who said, any sufficiently advanced technology is going to look like magic, to certain cultures. And even though I know exactly how everything works,
right,
when it's actually working, it just seems phenomenal,
Kind of what's the next steps with the challenge? How do you blow this up, I guess, to get to the other 6 scrolls that you currently have?
We're looking for a grand prize. The bar is very high, but if we meet the criteria for a grand prize award, which I believe we will, we're going to have an enormous amount of text from the interior of this scroll, certainly enough for the papyrologists to be able to identify the work and then tell us the significance of that work, which in the end is my goal as a scientist, is not to simply demonstrate the technical virtuosity, although that is certainly there. But what we want to see is for the scholars to do scholarship, right? That the images are good enough that they can simply be papyrologists and they can be classicists and they can do their work. So we're going after the completion of the competition, and then we're going to go after every one of those 400 scrolls using the next version of the technology, which is going to be even better and even better. And I think we'll have an escalating and accelerating set of tools that we will be able to apply to this problem.
So thinking about opening it up to the public, can you say a couple words about the importance of kind of publicly sharing this information or open sourcing computer technology as we go?
It's a really difficult decision to make, because every instinct that we have in the academic framework is one that is competitive and a little bit embargoed. When we compete for funding at the National Science Foundation, we don't share our proposal before we submit it with the world, because we need that to be our work and we need the funding to come to our team. So when you come to the place where you're going to crowdsource something or open it up for wide and varied scrutiny, you have to really ask yourself, is this the right thing? Is my instinct correct here or not correct? I think we've done exactly the right thing, because in this case, we need to build public supported interest. And we also need to really tap into the incredible talent pool that we have, not just in this country, but certainly in this country, but also globally. I mean, we have one of our competitors who is at a university in Germany, and he is competing with the other competitors. This is truly a global competition that represents the ability to use global talent. And, when that resource is available and it's appropriate, it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Is there anything that we've kind of skipped over that you think is fundamental to the story of how you got here?
Scientifically, I'm interested in the material because it's a scientific challenge to be able to pull from these ashes anything that looks at all like writing. We've solved a number of technical problems that we think will have application in other fields. But a lot of times people ask, is the material really worth it at a higher level? I mean, it's writing from the ancients. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't know how the planets worked. Why do we care? Don't we know everything now? So, often I get asked that question. And you might think that a scientist, in fact, really doesn't care about the content, that we only care about the science of solving a technical problem. But that's not true for me. I think that these manuscripts are incredibly important in the context of our humanity, because this is an era in human history for which we have very little knowledge and information. I mean, I think maybe 95%, some people have estimated, of the written material from the ancient world is now lost. We have a chance here to bring some of that back from the brink and maybe even conduct new excavations of a complete library, the only one ever discovered from antiquity. And I think it would be pretty narrow-minded as a scientist for me to say, I don't really care about what it actually says. I just want to demonstrate, that the technology can work. In fact, I care deeply about what these manuscripts say. And I also care deeply about the collaborative space that we are creating that says scientists and classicists can work side by side in understanding, these broader questions.
Special thanks to Brent Seales. For the Discovery Files, I'm Nate Podker. Please subscribe wherever you get podcasts, and if you like our program, share it with a friend and consider leaving a review. Discover how the U.S. National Science Foundation is advancing research at nsf.gov.